We made a move into a new city and found a house on the edge of town. When we were doing a walk through the house, the realtor alluded to the idea that the house had a long history, but she left out one important detail. When we left the house one day, one of the neighbors said something about the house having a spooky background. He wouldn't elaborate though, so I just brushed it off. We had a lot to do. We settled in and things were fine, but one day our small son told us about an old woman that sat next to his bed in a rocking chair. To him, it seemed just like a natural thing, so I thought it had to be his imagination. I've heard lots of kids at that age have imaginary friends. Later that week, it's the middle of the night and I'm asleep when I get the sense that there is something or someone in the room. I expected it to be my son, but when I opened my eyes, an older woman was standing silently by the bed. She didn't say anything, but just looked in my direction. Her face was hidden in shadows, so I couldn't make out her expression. I didn't get a malevolent vibe from her, but more like sadness. I didn't believe my eyes, so I closed them and held them shut for 10 seconds. When I opened them, she was gone, but I heard footsteps walking down the hallway outside my bedroom. Chills went up and down my body, but I immediately got out of bed, ran down the hall to get my son. When I got there, he was already awake though. When I went to pick him up, he asked me if I'd seen the old lady. By then, I'd calmed down a little and I said, yes, that I had seen her, but she scared me a little. I didn't really want him to know that I was truly terrified. He told me not to worry. The old lady had left the house and she wasn't going to come back. For some unknown reason, I believed him. Still, I brought him to bed with me for the next 3 nights, and the old lady didn't show up ever again, and there was a sense in the house that she never would. Most people think that hauntings only come in older houses, like creepy mansions or remote cabins. But from my experience, I learned that the age of the home isn't a determiner as to whether or not it has ghosts. I moved to a new city and bought a newer home. Almost upon moving in, I got this sense that I wasn't alone in the house, and I'm a bachelor. But just my intuition letting me know there was more there than met the eye. One night, I was at my kitchen table when I set down a glass, then turned around to get something from the fridge. When I turned back around, my glass was on the other side of the table. Again, I'm totally alone in the house. At first, I felt really spooked by it, but then my rational mind took over and told me that I must have moved it and just forgotten about it. Glasses don't move on their own, you know. On another night, I was about to go to bed when a dark figure passed by the doorway to my room. This really scared me. Did a burglar get in my house and was I being robbed? But the problem was that the figure didn't make any noise, not even a footfall, and the hallway floor was made of hard wood. Still, my heart was pounding. I grabbed the closest object I could find, which turned out to be a tennis racket, and I entered the hallway. The hallway felt like the temperature had dropped by 20 or 30 degrees, and goosebumps broke out on my arms. I toured the whole house with my tennis racket in hand, but didn't find anything. I slept fitfully that night with the lights on. When I asked about the house, the realtor neglected to tell me that the previous owner had killed themselves in the house. I'm not totally into ghost stuff, but I guess the house had an extra presence in it. But that extra presence was a ghost. I had a few more experiences like this, but once I got a girlfriend who later became my wife and then we had kids, there were no more issues. I guess all the life we brought into the house crowded out the ghost. As a kid, all the ghost stories I heard were scary, but I learned from personal experience that not all ghosts are frightful. This happened many years ago when I was about 5 years old. My grandfather had a heart attack. He survived it, but he was in pretty bad shape. My mom felt she needed to go take care of him for a couple weeks as he recuperated. so she took me along, thinking I might cheer him up. My grandparents lived in an old farmhouse out in the countryside. In the past, I'd always enjoyed spending time there because I got to pet some of the animals and got to go fishing with my grandpa in the stream behind the house. This time I knew it wasn't going to be like before because my grandpa was very weak. Because my mom had the guest room, I had to sleep in a smaller room in the attic. It wasn't a completely finished room, but my grandma made it homey enough for me. One night I was thirsty, so I called out to my mom that I needed some water. She must not have heard me, so I called out again. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I was so glad because it had to be my mom. Since I was still sleepy, I closed my eyes and waited for my mom to bring my water. The door opened and I heard footfalls in the room, but my mom didn't say anything, which I thought was strange. I thought she might say, "Here's your water," but she didn't say a word. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure at the end of the bed. I said, "Mom?" But the figure didn't say anything. I started to get a little scared, but then I got this other feeling that I shouldn't be. Still, I was afraid enough that I didn't move at all. The figure stayed at the end of my bed as if it were watching over me, like in a protective way. This lasted for about a minute, but then the figure just seemed to evaporate, as if it were never there. I decided I didn't need any water, but when I got up in the morning, I learned that my grandfather had had another heart attack and that he had passed away in the night. Of course, I was heartbroken, but I had to wonder if that was him at the end of my bed that night. I didn't say anything to my mom because she was so sad. In fact, I never told anyone until now. When I was in college, I didn't have a lot of money. We lived in the northern part of Ohio near Cleveland. My grandparents were snowbirds, spending most of the winter months in Florida, which left their house empty for a big part of the school year. Between us, we decided it might be a good idea for me to house sit their place while they were gone. It meant they had someone in the house to look things over, and it gave me a rent-free place to stay. It wasn't all lazing around, though. It was a big house, and my grandfather demanded that I check all the plumbing in the house every 2 or 3 days because he didn't want a pipe to freeze and burst. Really, that wasn't a problem except for a back bedroom on the second floor. For as long as they lived in that house, there was something about that back room that creeped me out. There was always this sense that there was some presence in the room, but the room was always empty. As a kid, when I visited the house, I always maintained a safe, assured distance from that room. My grandfather was a demanding man, though, and he seemed to have this sixth sense that I wasn't checking that bathroom in that room. Still, I cut my visits down to once a week in that room, and every time I entered the place, I felt a chill pass through my body. The longer I spent in the house that winter, the more that creepy feeling started to permeate the entire house. It definitely made making that trip to that back bedroom more and more challenging for me, since I was alone in the house. I hit the 2-week mark on not flushing the toilet in the back bedroom when my grandfather called from Florida, and he asked specifically if the toilet in that room had been flushed. He said he'd been checking the weather, and the news said that the temperatures would get well below freezing in the area, and that plumbing had to be monitored. I sort of fibbed and said I did it a couple days ago, but he said I should do it every day. I groaned inside, but I knew he was right. So after I got off the phone with him, I mustered all my courage and made my way to that bedroom. Once I got in the room, it seemed colder than normal, but I attributed that to the cold spell outside. Still, I planned to make this a quick in and out. I got into the bathroom, turned on the sink to make sure the water was flowing, then flushed the toilet. All was normal, but the toilet took forever to fill. Just as the water leveled off, I turned around and saw a ghostly black figure in the doorway of the room, blocking my way out. It wasn't just dark, but it was like the absence of light. I never felt so trapped in my entire life. The figure stood there, radiating darkness the way light radiates luminosity. All the while, I was frozen in fear. Once I broke from my trance of fear, I even considered jumping out the window, but it was across the room. So I just stepped back into the bathroom and closed the door, hoping whatever it was would just go away. Outside the door, I heard breathing. But then it moved out of the room. After that, I only checked that room in the brightest of daylight and only once a week, frozen pipes or not.